In this video, we're going to talk about on-page search engine optimization. Now, I don't want you to get worried about that phrase because really it just boils down to creating a roadmap for Google that clearly matches up the search term to the best piece of content on your website or within your blog. Now, that just consists of making sure that we have key elements taken care of within a piece of content. And this illustration here just kind of gives you an overview of what those are. And it consists of a few core pieces of information that will help Google find the right content for a given search phrase. And we're going to walk through that today as a follow-up to the videos that we've done on keyword research and then mapping those keywords to specific pieces of content on the website. So before you actually jump into writing content, I want to just do a little recap on the keywords. Now, we talked already about finding the right keywords for your target demographic and the things that you offer, but let's do a little review and talk about a real scenario that I ran into with a client many years ago. So my client was a health blogger, and she was writing an article that was about the health benefits of parsley when used in juice. And when I went to look at the blog post she had written, she told me that she wasn't ranking anywhere for it and she didn't know why. Well, when I looked at the actual blog post itself, the keyword selection that she had chosen and optimized to was parsley. Well, when we look at that search volume, it's a very large search volume. There's lots and lots of results in Google for it, and it's very broad. And quite honestly, she wasn't writing about parsley. She was writing about parsley recipes, but still that wasn't really about her actual content. What was her content really about? Well, she was actually writing about the health benefits of parsley and about how you can use parsley within juice to take advantage of those health benefits. And as we started to walk through the individual keyword phrases that were options for her, she realized that she picked a very broad keyword, and she had parsley identified as a focus keyword all over her website and her blog, which was very confusing to her, and it was very confusing to Google. And the resolution of that was making sure that she clearly understood what the focus of the article was about, and then she made sure that her on-page optimization matched up to this focus. So that's just the first thing I'd like you to think of. Second thing I want you to think about is who you're writing that content for and making sure that you are writing content that both search engines and users will love. Now, one thing to keep in mind with current SEO and search is that long-form content tends to win in SEO and dominates the page one of Google search results. In a recent study, the study showed that most pieces of content that were on page one were at least 2,000 words, and most of them, the number one spot was about 2,400. And you compare that to the amount of content on a typical blog post, which could be anywhere from 300 to 600, it starts to really take that down, and you can see where there's some variances. So why do long pieces of content rank better? Well, it gives more in-depth information. You tend to explore a topic much more thoroughly, which means people find it helpful. Longer content also leads to more shares on social media, and the more visibility you get of your content, the more backlinks it will bring from other websites, blogs, news article or news outlets and things like that. That does make a difference because backlinks do influence ranking. And then, when you have that longer content, it also helps convert better because you've shown people that you are a true expert on a subject and you are helping, demonstrate your authority on that topic. All of that leads to, greater reactions from those humans and better ranking. Now, that doesn't mean all content has to be this long, but it is something to keep in mind as you go to write content. Now, the next thing is to optimize your content for SEO best practices, but always keep that human in mind because we always want to make sure that content is very readable and it is good and helpful for the human, because if it's not, it won't convert and the SEO won't mean anything anyways. So what should we be considering when we're looking at on-page SEO? Well, here's a list, and don't worry, we're going to hit each one of these briefly. But the title of the content itself, which is basically the page name, the URL, the headers, the paragraph text, the intro paragraph text, and then text throughout, content variations, related phrases, and semantic search terms, internal linking, and that link anchor text, images, readability, and then those little powerful meta titles and descriptions all really do help make an impact. Readability, let's start there because it really is important. So if SEO is done right, your content will be very readable. It will make humans happy. Those happy humans makes Google happy, which equals higher ranking. It's as simple as that. How do you make things readable? You use shorter paragraphs. We make sure that we have bullets where bullets can be helpful, subheaders to really section out longer pieces of content so visitors can scan and jump to things that are really important to them. We use regular verbiage and we skip the very complex industry jargon. We don't allow images to interfere with text flow. And I say no bling, no bling, no bling, no bling, because the more bling you start to put in, and that means a variety of colors and moving images and automated videos and things like that, it becomes very distracting and it is no longer readable. I cannot read a piece of content if there's a GIF or there's a video ad playing right next to it, and I will leave the page. And I'm not the only one, so it's just something to to think about. So the page name is also important. When we're going through these items and what to think about, always remember if it is an SEO piece of content that you want to appear in search and bring in traffic, you need to make sure that you have a focus keyword in mind and assigned to it. You can have secondary keyword phrases, but keep in mind that primary keyword. And I'm going to keep repeating that. So your primary keyword would be included in your page name. Whether it's a page or a post or a piece of content in your resource library, it needs to include that phrase. It can have other references along with it, other words along with it, but it needs that core phrase. If you are local, you don't have to force the local city in there because that's not how search works anymore. Local SEO works very differently than it did 10 years ago. So just keep that in mind. If green apples is your focus keyword phrase, we want to have the page title be green apples, so it helps Google understand the nature of that content. And the same thing goes for the URL. Just like the page name, Google looks closely at the URL, and the URL helps Google understand what to expect when they get there and they start to read that content. And so just keep that focus keyword there, and we want to keep URLs as short as possible. If we can have content silos in there to help with search, that would be wonderful, although they don't apply to every website or every section of a website. The H1 header in WordPress is typically the very first thing that's on the page, and it is by default the same piece of content or the same phrases that you've used for your page title. Now, certain custom templates will override that, but just as a general rule, like for if you were to write a blog post, the blog post title as a default is the H1 header, which is great because we want the focus keyword to appear there. It is very important because it helps create an outline for the search engines. And we'll talk a little bit about headers elsewhere as we move forward. So we talked just now about the H1. Now let's talk about the H2. So there's a hierarchy to your header structure. H1 is the primary topic of the page. And now H2s and H3s and H4s, those are used to create an outline for the content. When done right, you have those aligned with sections of content within a page or a post, and they create structure for the search engines. So if I have a page about apples and I have sections in the page about green apples versus red apples, green apples could potentially be an H2 header, as would red apples, because I'm talking about green apples in a certain section and I'm talking about red apples in a certain section. Now, if I started to talk about Granny Smith apples, they might fall underneath, the green apple section. Just as if you would do an outline for a paper or a book or anything else, think of that with your content, because those outlines become important and your subheaders should support the outline of that structure. Now, semantic HTML5 is something that is used to help the search engines understand that content's outline. And here's my example with the apples, where I have the H1, which is the overriding topic of the page, is an apple. The H2 is traditional red apples, and then I also have alternate apples. And then you can see underneath I actually have additional types of apples. And those again are headers, and underneath the headers I would have actual paragraph content. But you can see as I'm walking through this apple example that is giving an outline, and that outline helps Google understand that content. It is really important. So something just to keep in mind as you are styling or entering in your own content that may be SEO friendly and appealing to Google for search. Paragraph text is something to think about as well, because it really is important. You always want to make sure that you have a good amount of paragraph text on a page or a post. Some templates will be coded with very little paragraph text, and in some places that's perfectly fine because it's like a gateway page that leads to other pieces of content, or it's an overview and things like that. If we want a page to actually be focused for a keyword and bring in traffic from SEO, we need to make sure that we have some paragraph text in there. We need to make sure that our keyword phrase or phrases appear in that paragraph text, and we want to just use it naturally throughout. We do not need to have a specific keyword density because that actually no longer exists in the SEO world. Instead, semantic usage of language is much more important, and I'll talk about that in a second. Just things to keep in mind. When you're writing your content, make sure that you are just weaving naturally in keyword phrases and variations and synonyms of your focus keyword phrases. Where do you get those variations? Well, you can brainstorm them. You can look at competitor sites. You can look at some of the SEO tools I've showed you or talked about in the past on our training videos like KW Finder. People also search for on Google, just lots and different ways that you can find it. You could even just search for the given phrase and look to see what shows up on page 1 and 2, and you'll see many variations showing up for you to review and document. Now let's talk a second about semantic search. So semantics takes into account those headers that we mentioned before, but it's really semantics are used with artificial intelligence to help Google understand the nature of content. And it's really just as a matter of that, and it doesn't have to be super complex or technical. So semantic search itself allows Google to piece together pieces of information around the web to better figure out what something is. What are some semantic search factors? Current trends, the location of the search intent, that hot dog versus the dog that needs some shade, word variations, the singular versus the plural, synonyms, word groupings and things like that. In today's search, Google understands that small, tiny, miny, and miniature are all the same. It didn't 10 years ago, but it does today. So these are things to keep in mind. So when you're writing content and you're using things naturally, make sure that you're considering all of these different elements if possible, because it does help Google better understand your content, and it will also help Google better rank your content. So now let's go back to our generics, or our search for Apple, right, in our Apple content. How does Google know that I'm talking about the apple you eat versus Apple the company, or maybe a laptop that Apple makes? Well, it's the semantic language within the blog post or within the piece of content that would help Google understand that. So when Google looks at my, say, blog post about apples, if it sees elements like color and taste and texture and freshness and calories and orchard, it would know I'm talking about an apple you eat. But now flip that to the other types of apples that we could be discussing. If within that content it sees, instead of freshness or orchard, it starts to see stock prices or subsidiaries or board members, it knows I'm talking about Apple the company. Now take that one step further, and we didn't talk about any of that stuff. Instead, we're talking about processors and memory and storage and retina display and keyboards. Now Google knows I'm talking about Apple equipment. And it's all of those little nuances that you build into the content that you're writing that help you optimize it for search and optimize it for SEO. And really at the bottom of the day, all you're doing is helping Google better understand the nature of your content and how to use it to help humans solve their problems in search. Now, another element to consider are images. Images are important because for two reasons. Images can themselves show up in search and be found, but they can also support the content itself, the written content. When Google is looking at my content about apples, if it has an image that's on the page about a red apple or a red delicious apple, and I clearly define that's what that image is, it helps Google understand that my content's about apple that you eat. Now take, if I had a piece of content about the apple that you eat, and instead I have an image of a laptop, right? That laptop is going to start confusing Google because it doesn't align with the content. And you might be asking yourself, how does Google know what that image is about? Well, it's the alt text that allows it to understand that. And you need to pay attention to your alt text as part of the SEO process, not just on individual pages, but in the whole WordPress media library. It's very important. When you're writing alt text, you don't want to become spammy or confusing or anything else. You just want to describe the image itself. And you want to make sure that you provide good descriptions because you are helping Google know what that image is to be able to rank that image in search or be able to rank your content that uses the image, because all of it together helps Google understand the nature of what you are writing about. Now, meta titles and meta descriptions are the little guys that show up on the search engine results page. One is a title and one is a few sentences that help describe the content that is being linked to. These are very powerful because they are your first opportunity to sell to the humans before they ever actually reach your website or your blog. We want to make sure that these are informative. We want to describe the content. We want to include our keywords, and we want to keep them in the appropriate number of characters. A meta title is 55 characters and a meta description is 155. Now, we do know that in some cases Google will use more than this for the meta description, and that's fine. If your meta description is over it, just make sure that your keyword, your focus keyword, is included in the meta title and in the meta description, and they're both towards the front. So if something does get cut off, you're not going to have the keyword get cut off, so it can help both Google understand the nature of your content as well as what might be linking to in the search engine results page for those humans. When I see search engine results that come back with meta titles and descriptions that match my search query as a human, I'm more inclined to actually click through to them and visit those websites. Now, one of the final things that we want to discuss is internal linking. I always say that these are the heroes of SEO, and they're silent heroes because people do not realize that internal links are extremely powerful. Google specifically tells us that they matter in Google Search Console, and they say specifically that the number of internal links pointing to a given URL is a signal. It's a data point for the search engines to the importance level of that piece of content. The more links you have going to a piece of content, the more Google believes that content is important. Now, it's not just the number of links that matter, it's also the text that you use to link into that piece of content. It should align with your keyword focus. It should be specific about that piece of content, and it should not conflict with other links and destinations that you have on the website. Now, if you have a large website, you might be thinking, whoa, that's a lot to consider and to think about. And yes, it is, because links do matter and they can definitely help or hurt your ranking. Now, when I go to enterprise level websites and I look at them, and the enterprise website should have good ranking because it is a very well-respected company and website and domain, and it's got good authority. And when it doesn't rank well, typically the reason I see more than anything is because their internal links are a hot mess. And that's the best word I can use to describe it, because a hot mess is what they are, and they're haphazard and there's no plan. They're conflicting, they're confusing, and that creates havoc. So make sure that you have a thought process outlined and you follow it for internal linking for your website. Very important that this is in place at go live, so you're sending the right signals to a search engine. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind is that, Google tells us that the way that we link up to content and the verbiage that we use makes a difference, right? This is actually an image from Google where Google's saying, when I'm seeing baseball card used and all of these links from these different places on the website pointing to this one page, I know that page is about baseball cards. It helps me understand what that page is about. And so that's important. Keep that in mind. Keep this little guy in mind, the little robot there, because he's important for you to be able to rank. He needs to know how to navigate around your website, and he needs to know, what content is about, and your internal links and the verbiage you use help him understand that. Now, a couple of things to consider is, again, how you link really matters to the search engines. The text is important. Try not to use click here, read more, and things like that. Try not to use very generic terms because it's not helping the search engines or screen readers understand the nature of that link and that destination content it's going to find. And then the last thing is consider how many times you're going to link on a given URL. So let's say that my home page has 2 links coming out of it right now. It's not really realistic, but it's good for just this education data point that we have. So my homepage has 2 links. One is going to a service page and one is going to another service page. Because there's only 2 links, the link value from that homepage is split in 2. So each service page gets 50% of the value of that link. Now this is important for incoming SEO or for SEO for the internal links. It also would apply to any backlinks coming into your site. Now let's assume that my homepage, instead of having 2 links, has 5 links, and they're going to the 5 different destinations. So homepage gets 5 different links going to 5 different destinations. So instead of that link having the power of 50%, it now has been diluted down to 20%. Each link is only getting 20% of that link love because there's now 5 links. Now think about it where you've written maybe a piece of content and you've got 25 links on that blog post. And you want those links to have value for the destination content they're pointing to. Not very much value going because it's been distributed across so many different links. Just something to keep in mind as you're writing content and you're thinking about how you might want to position those links in your search. They do really matter, and it's something that we want to make sure that is considered as you are optimizing your site online. So that concludes and wraps up our overview of on-page SEO optimization. I hope this video was of value and it helps prepare you for the steps ahead.